intimidation, smear campaigns, or the manipulation of legal processes to harass and intimidate individuals that are critical of the nation acting as the aggressor. Simply put, transnational repression is when authoritarian regimes like the Chinese Communist Party or Iran or others go beyond their borders to harass and silence their citizens or others and others who defend human rights and advocate for free speech. Transnational repression is not exclusive to any specific country. We've seen these oppressive acts employed by nations that are hostile to the United States and those who view our nation, who our nation views as strategic partners and allies as well. Regardless of our nation's relationship with the perpetrating nation, using violence or harassment to silence dissident voices in our nation is illegal and should not be tolerated by our government. Although this issue is not new, the threat of transnational repression has grown significantly in the last few years. Some specific events include, in January of 23, the Department of Justice announced charges on individuals associated with Eastern Europe transnational criminal organizations who were directed by Iran to carry out an assassination plot on a U.S. citizen who spoke out against the regime's human rights abuses. In April 2023, 40 officers of China's national police were charged by the Department of Justice in transnational repression schemes targeting U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents, including operating an illegal police station in Lower Manhattan. In November of 23, the DOJ charged an official within the Indian government, Nikhil Gupta, with murder for hire charges in connection with a foiled assassination plot of a U.S. citizen who is a prominent Sikh activist in New York City. Foreign government, and these are just a few of the many acts of transnational repression that have taken place on U.S. soil in the past few years. Foreign governments that engage in transnational repression continue to utilize new and innovative tactics to silence victims, such as using U.S.-based individuals and groups to unwittingly help these foreign governments commit acts of transnational repression. These actions have included hiring U.S.-based private investigators, co-opting law enforcement officers or employees of social media companies, and recruiting members of local diaspora communities. Transnational repression will continue to be used as a tool to silence views that run afoul to those of autocratic governments if all branches of our government do not step up and work to solve this challenge. We must find a way to effectively deter nation-states from engaging in transnational repression. I hope that today's testimony will inspire members of this subcommittee to take action and work in a bipartisan manner to find solutions. The United States must remain a bastion for every person to freely express their views without fear of persecution from foreign actors. As chairman of the subcommittee, I'm committed to working with anyone to uphold that commitment. This committee, in fact, has led multiple initiatives to conduct vigorous oversight on the government's actions in combating transnational repression. Last year, the committee held a hearing with a government panel that examined the threats posed by the CCP to the homeland. And in that hearing, the witnesses discussed how the CCP's acts of transnational repression, including the use of illegal police stations across the country, negatively impacted us. The committee has also heard from Masih Alinejad about her experience being targeted by the Iranian regime. Lastly, the committee recently sent a letter to Secretary Mayorkas and FBI Director Wray highlighting the threats posed by transnational repression and requesting a classified briefing to discuss the threat. These are just some of the many ongoing efforts this committee has taken to ensure that we effectively combat this threat. I'm delighted to have an esteemed panel join us here today to discuss this pressing national security threat. We will hear perspectives from two victims of transnational repression and two different experts that are working to address this issue as well. I know all their insight will have a profound impact on this committee, and I look forward to today's conversation and look forward to working with Ranking Member Magaziner and other members of this committee on this issue. And I now recognize Ranking Member, the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Magaziner, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Pfluger, for calling this important hearing. And to our distinguished panel of witnesses, I recognize it takes incredible courage for you to come before us and speak out today against those who seek to silence and even kill those who dissent. So thank you for your willingness to share your experiences and your expertise with all of us. The purpose of today's hearing is to explore how to prevent and protect against nation-states' efforts to harass and intimidate their own citizens and critics of their government living in the United States. Foreign governments are increasingly and more aggressively disregarding U.S. laws to threaten, harass, surveil, stalk, and even plot to physically harm people in our homeland. At our October full committee hearing examining threats to the homeland posed by Iran, we heard from Ms. Meza Ahmadinejad, an Iranian-American activist who had been the target of kidnapping and assassination plots directed by the Iranian regime. 1 month later, an unsealed Department of Justice indictment alleged that an Indian government employee had directed a plot to murder a Sikh leader here in the United States, Mr. Gurpatwant Pannoon. The plots against Ms. Ahmadinejad and Mr. Pannoon are horrific and unacceptable. However, they are unfortunately not the only examples of transnational repression on U.S. soil. Transnational repression can involve physical violence, as well as coercing someone to return to their home country, or threatening and detaining family members back home. Religious and ethnic minority groups like Muslims, Sikhs, and Uyghurs face threats from the governments of India and China, respectively, while the government of Turkey practiced enforced disappearances of its political and religious opponents living abroad. Political and human rights activists and journalists face smear campaigns and other attacks by tyrannical regimes seeking to squash opposition and prevent truthful reporting. Intimidation and violence toward any community in the United States by any nation-state is intolerable and unacceptable. That is why I was pleased to see President Biden directly address the Pannoon murder plot by the Indian government at the G20 summit with Prime Minister Modi in September, and to see the administration taking action to combat transnational repression, including arresting and prosecuting many individuals in the United States for conspiring to act as agents of the Chinese Communist Party in connection with operating illegal police stations in the United States to monitor and intimidate those dissidents who were critical of the CCP. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency launched its high-risk community protection initiative to combat digital transnational repression, and the state and treasury departments are sanctioning perpetrators of transnational repression for their involvement in repressive acts against individuals residing in the United States. We must remain focused on preserving America's reputation as the beacon of hope and freedom to the world and condemn all forms of transnational repression. Holding perpetrators accountable is of strategic importance as it ensures that the United States stays true to our values, ensures the safety of all U.S. persons, and protects the sovereignty and security of our homeland. So I'm looking forward to today's bipartisan discussion, and I'm particularly eager to hear from our witnesses how the U.S. government can do more to deter and mitigate transnational repression and what we can do in Congress working together on a bipartisan basis toward that end. So thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. I'm pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this very important topic, and I now ask that our witnesses rise and please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Let the record reflect the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. I'd now like to formally introduce our witnesses. First, I'd like to introduce Ms. Annie Wilcox-Boyajian, who serves as Vice President of Policy and Advocacy at Freedom House and serves as the Mark Palmer Distinguished Fellow. Freedom House is a nonprofit, nonpartisan 501c3 organization that works to expand and defend freedom worldwide. In her roles, she oversees Freedom House's policy and advocacy work, leading engagement with the U.S. government in collaboration with American human rights groups. Ms. Boyajian has testified before the U.S. Congress, the Canadian Parliament, and Taiwan's Legislative Yuan, and regularly advises policymakers and staff. We look forward to hearing from you. Next, I'd like to welcome my constituent from Midland, Texas, Dr. Bob Fu. Dr. Fu is a pastor and the president of China Aid. He has admirably dedicated his life to helping those escaping religious persecution in the People's Republic of China. As president of China Aid, Dr. Fu has testified numerous times before domestic and international governmental bodies. Dr. Fu has been targeted a multitude of times by the CCP for his work. He too will share his horrifying experiences that he's had as a victim of transnational repression. Dr. Fu, thank you for being here. I would now like to introduce Mr. Enes Kanter, a human rights activist, a former NBA star, and a Nobel Peace Prize nominee. Due to his outspoken views and his ongoing work on human rights abuses in China, Turkey, and other parts of the world, Mr. Freedom's career in the NBA was derailed by the league's financial decision to pander to the Chinese Communist Party so that it could continue to broadcast games in the PRC. Over the course of the last 10 years, Mr. Freedom has also been targeted numerous times by the Turkish government. He was nearly kidnapped in Sri Lanka. His family has been subjected to ongoing scrutiny and detention by the Turkish government, and he has received countless death threats and has had multiple Interpol red notices issued against him, which is a request to law enforcement around the world to locate and provisionally arrest a person pending extradition, surrender, or a related legal action. In addition to that harassment, the CCP has led an effort to silence him. Today, he'll share his experience of being a victim of transnational repression. Lastly, we welcome Ms. Gisu Nia, who serves as the Director of the Strategic Litigation Project at the Atlantic Council. The Strategic Litigation Project works on prevention and accountability efforts for atrocity crimes, human rights violations, terrorism, and corruption offenses around the world. She also serves as board chair of the Iran Human Rights Documentation Center, where she is helping develop and oversee the group's human rights advocacy and legal programs. The center seeks to promote accountability, respect for human rights, and the rule of law in Iran. Ms. Nia started her career in The Hague, where she worked on war crimes and crimes against humanity trials at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and International Criminal Court. She was previously Deputy Director of the Center for Human Rights in Iran. Again, I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for joining us, and I now recognize Ms. Boyajian for your opening statement, and if you guys don't mind, we'll keep these to 5 minutes as the members do have questions. Thank you.
Chairman Pfluger, Ranking Member Magaziner, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. As you have so eloquently described, transnational repression occurs when states reach across borders to silence dissent among exiles and diasporas, presenting a direct threat to security and rights and a challenge for both domestic and international policy. From 2014 through 2022, Freedom House documented 854 instances of direct physical transnational repression around the world. This includes things like assassinations, kidnappings, assaults, detentions, deportations. These acts were committed by 38 governments in 91 countries. These numbers are likely only the tip of the iceberg when you factor in indirect tactics. That's things like surveillance, harassment, use of spyware, threats against family members, which is known as coercion by proxy. The top 10 perpetrators of transnational repression globally are China, Turkey, Tajikistan, Egypt, Russia, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Iran, Belarus, and Rwanda. Together, these 10 countries are responsible for 80% of the cases in our database. China, which conducts the most comprehensive and sophisticated campaign, is responsible for 30% of the cases in our database. In the United States, we are generally better protected from transnational oppression than in many other places due to our strong rule of law and robust security sector. But many communities in the United States face serious and persistent threats, as my fellow witnesses will tell you firsthand today. Many are surveilled, harassed, or have family members who are threatened. Some recent egregious examples, some of which were already mentioned, include an attempted kidnapping and then attempted assassination against an Iranian women's rights activist. Last November, peaceful demonstrators were physically assaulted in San Francisco during the APEC summit. This is American citizens and residents who were roughed up for exercising their free speech rights, protesting human rights abuses in China. Later that same month, federal authorities indicted and arrested an Indian national for alleged conspiracy to murder a Sikh activist based in Queens. In addition to threats from China, Iran, and India, there are substantial reasons to be concerned about threats towards US persons originating from an even broader set of countries. This includes Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the UAE, Turkey, Russia, Rwanda, Ethiopia, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Bangladesh. One way transnational repression manifests in the United States is through the manipulation or misuse of our own institutions. This can occur through Interpol abuse, which is when countries misuse Interpol's notification systems to have someone detained on spurious charges. Similarly, foreign intelligence agencies sometimes provide false information for our asylum and immigration officials, which can result in the deportation of individuals who have sought shelter in the United States. There has been strong bipartisan interest in addressing this issue. The Biden administration has made countering transnational repression a priority across agencies, and we are pleased to see generally strong interagency coordination and, as we understand it, increasing engagement between the executive branch and the Hill, which are critical if we're going to effectively address this. There's also legislation pending in Congress, but additional action is urgently needed. For too long, democracies have missed or allowed the actions of authoritarian countries inside our borders, and this has emboldened states to act without fear of consequences. To address this threat, Congress should codify a definition of transnational repression and ensure the United States has the necessary legal authorities to sufficiently address the threat and support those who are targeted. US law does not currently include a definition, which we can talk about more during Q&A. There are two proposals pending in Congress that would address this. One is the Transnational Repression Policy Act, which directs the creation of a strategy, training, and sanctions, and the Stop Transnational Repression Act, which would create criminal penalties. The subject matter of those bills extends beyond the jurisdiction of this committee, but we do urge members to consider co-sponsoring. Congress should also work with the executive branch and with state and local officials to ensure that personnel coming in contact with perpetrators and victims of transnational repression receive the training necessary to recognize and respond. Many agencies do provide training, but it is not standardized across agencies, so there are different definitions and recommended actions. Finally, Congress should urge the executive branch to review current information sharing practices to ensure efficient communication within and between agencies and trusted partners. There is robust communication occurring, but their challenges do remain. And this is in part because transnational repression transcends so many domestic and international facing agencies, and also law enforcement and the legal system need to keep a lot of information confidential. We do have additional recommendations that I'm happy to talk about further that stretch outside the jurisdiction of this committee, and I really look forward to your questions and appreciate speaking with you today.
Thank you, Ms. Boyajian. The chair now recognizes Dr. Bob Fu for his 5-minute opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and honorable members of this subcommittee. I really appreciate for this opportunity to share with you. While the CCP, under Communist Party leader Xi Jinping, has engaged perhaps the worst repression against religious freedom, rule of law, and human rights since the Cultural Revolution. The transnational repression effort under CCP and overseas has been recognized as the most systematic, multi-front, and multifaceted inside our Western free societies. And the CCP first compulsively legalized its overseas spying work for all the Chinese. According to this new Chinese national intelligence law passed in 2017, virtually every Chinese, including those who were born in the US and overseas, are mandated to do spy work. And of course, the CCP used its different pro-China organizations to engage these transnational activities. The Chinese embassies and 150 US-based Chinese students and scholar associations, All China Federation of Returned Overseas Chinese, and many other organizations has been recruited in engaging these repression activities. And the CCP, of course, has directly engaging from kidnapping to physical harassment to cyber threats to individuals and organizations alike. In my written testimony, I mentioned one case, Mr. Zhu Meng, Joseph Zhu, who was just a worker from a Chinese house church in a American missionary organization based in Seoul, South Korea. And yet, after he was kidnapped when he returned to Beijing, he was sent back to sent back to Seoul, South Korea, with a programmed iPad and a number of cash in his hand to spy this American organization in Seoul. And then in early 2020, he was found hanged on a tree and died. And the case is still not being resolved. And multiple of my staff members based in Midland, Texas, have been targeted over the years. Most of them are naturalized American citizens. When they return to China to visit their friends, they have to surrender their American passports to the Chinese national state security agents. And they need to get their American passport to apply for their American passport to travel outside town. So that is to my staff. And in terms of to myself, I have a first-hand experience back to from September 2020. All of a sudden, my family, my home were being found surrounded, sometimes as many over 100 Chinese thugs wearing masks and chanting elimination of Bob Fu every day from 9 o'clock a.m. to 4 o'clock p.m. without stop for 3 months. So the FBI and our local law enforcement have to evacuate my family out of our own house. We were exiled from our own home for 3 months. Of course, I also received multiple threats from last year, including text messages, including, of course, those is called swatting messages, and from San Francisco, from Los Angeles to New York, Houston, their police stations have received like fake bomb threats. Basically, I was booked with multiple luxury hotels and in my name and claiming I had bombs. So just a quick recommendation. Number one, I think I would recommend to the committee to urge the administration to restore the China initiative within the Department of Justice. I think that has nothing to do with racial profiling or any bias or racist anything. If we recognize China, the CCP is the #1 transnational threat, as my fellow the panelist Annie just mentioned, and the law enforcement has acknowledged, we should really restore that initiative. And I also want to recommend both the administration and the congressional, we should establish a national database to collecting these cases. I think FBI has a center, but it's not enough. We should have more comprehensive data. The final recommendation is I would urge Congress to pass a legislation to ban those individuals and entities associated with the CCP and its foreign agents from purchasing real estate and to avoid them establishing permanent bases to harass and engage transnational threats. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fu. The chair now recognizes Mr. Enes Kanter Freedom for his opening statement of 5 minutes.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Chairman Fluger, Ranking Member Magaziner, and members of the committee for giving me the opportunity to testify today on a very important issue of transnational repression. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's long arm has reached tens of thousands of Turkish citizens abroad, while Turkey has been experiencing a deepening human rights crisis since then alleged coup attempt in July 15, 2016. The Turkish government has been carrying out an extraordinary campaign of transnational repression against the critics overseen since the failed coup. The State Department 2022 country reports on human rights practices in Turkey reported that the Turkish government increasingly coordinated with other authoritarian states to forcibly transfer more than 100 Turkish nationals to Turkey since the 2016 coup, and more than 40 individuals were put through abductions, rendition, and forcible return. Turkey's campaign has mostly targeted people affiliated with the Gülen movement. The movement is a globally respected faith-based civil society inspired by Turkish cleric Fethullah Gülen, focusing on promoting interfaith dialogue and education throughout the world. The Fethullah Gülen has dedicated his life to interfaith and intercultural dialogue, community service, and providing access to quality education. He was the first influential Muslim public figure to condemn the 9/11 attacks publicly and express sympathy for the American people. His lifelong work on interfaith cooperation has earned him a recognition from the Christian and Jewish leaders in his homeland Turkey and a personal audience with the late Pope John Paul II. His efforts have also been praised by other global leaders who recognizes his vital role in fostering mutual understanding and peace and his leadership in humanitarian initiatives. In 2008, Mr. Gülen was ranked among the top 100 most influential person by Time Magazine and Foreign Policy and Prospect Magazine's joint poll of the top 100 public intellectuals. Many respected institutions awarded him with the Peace Awards, but Erdogan regime labeled him as a terrorist because Mr. Gülen was pro-democracy and in opposition to Erdogan's policies. The latest Human Rights Report on Turkey by the U.S. Department of State sets out the violation by Turkey, including politically motivated retaliation against the individuals located outside the country and kidnappings and the transfer without due process of alleged members of the Gülen movement. Turkish intelligence abducted Selahattin Gülen, who was a teacher in Kenya, and Orhan İnandı, who was the chairman of a successful school network in Kyrgyzstan. They were abducted and faced torture in prison, and they published İnandı's picture on Turkish media with a broken arm. Most recently, they abducted Koray Vural, who was a businessman in Tajikistan. The list goes on and on. As the reports say, more than 100 individuals abducted by the Turkish intelligence face torture in prison. Turkey is also pressuring other countries to close many successful schools, math and science academies. As the State Department reported on the Human Rights Country Report in 2022, the government applied bilateral pressure on other governments to secure their assistance with renditions without full due process and couched such requests as cooperation on countering terrorism. Some observers attributed to abrupt closure of a popular Gülen-affiliated school in Albania in September with pressure from the Turkish government. A letter sent to the Turkish government in 2022 by the responsible United Nations Special Rapporteur condemned the systemic practice of a state-sponsored extraterritorial abduction and forcible return of Turkish citizens from many countries. Between 2014 and 2023, Freedom House recorded 112 incidents of physical transnational repression against journalists perpetrated by 26 governments. Turkey is one of the leading ones. A Turkish journal interviewed by Freedom House experienced the closure of U.S. bank accounts, likely due to empty terrorism accusations from the Turkish government. There are dozens of people who live in the U.S. and their accounts are still closed. People whose name appear on the published list have faced various repercussions, including the freezing or closure of their accounts, negative credit scores, and various other personal and financial difficulties in Western countries. As the reports mentioned, after 2016, Erdogan's regime started to arrest everyone who was in opposition. In one day, more than 2 million people labeled as terrorists in Turkey. Then I began to call out human rights violations by President Erdogan in my home country. The Turkish government asked the US government to extradite me back to Turkey, cancel my passport, put my name on Interpol list, imprison my father, and set thousands of dollars bounty on my head. During a 2017 visit to Indonesia, I was nearly kidnapped by the local government officials with intentions to send me back to Turkey. With the help of a good local officer, I was able to get out of that country right away. Later that year, I hardly escaped from police officers at the Romanian airport that the Turkish government sent after me. They tried to arrest me and send me back to Turkey. Thankfully, U.S. Senator Lankford got involved and helped me fly back to the U.S. In 9 years, I received 12 arrest warrants and countless death threats. They tried to attack me in front of a mosque in Boston. They run social media campaigns against me so their fanatics could harass me or attack me when they see me. They pressure American universities, NGOs, and political groups to cancel their events with me. Sadly, all these are happening because of a so-called NATO ally. Instead of protecting and supporting democracy and human rights in the country or abroad, they became an enemy of the democracy and human rights. 7 years after having my Turkish citizenship revoked, I became an American citizen. While becoming a citizen, I changed my last name to Freedom and dedicated my whole life to defend freedom. I am very grateful to the members of the Congress for inviting me to here and allowing me to share my story and the story of millions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Freedom. The chair now recognizes Ms. Nia for your 5-minute opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, members of the Subcommittee on Counterterrorism, Law Enforcement, and Intelligence. Thank you for inviting me here to testify on the problem of transnational repression and the threat it poses to the United States and Americans wherever they may be in the world. My team at the Strategic Litigation Project at the Atlantic Council includes lawyers from the Uyghur community, Venezuela, Cuba, Afghanistan, Iran, and other regions of the world, and so this testimony is partly informed by that and the experiences of the impacted communities that we speak to. First, I'm going to discuss gaps in the law here in the US and new legal tools that can address this problem. And then I'll touch on a few themes I've observed in interacting with these communities, and maybe that can help better inform law enforcement and this committee's decisions on this matter. So fighting transnational repression should start with defining in clear legal terms what the problem exactly is. And I think we've heard from my fellow panelists that there are 2 pieces of legislation pending that would seek to define this term. We have a need for a robust criminal legal approach to address the problem of transnational repression. A comprehensive definition introduced through legislation could allow prosecutors to target perpetrators more directly. If we look at the criminal indictment against the perpetrators who attempted to kidnap Iranian-American dissident Masih Alinejad, who this committee is familiar with, there was a reliance on charges such as conspiracy to commit bank and wire fraud and conspiracy to commit money laundering. While the first paragraph of that indictment identified the problem as one of transnational repression, the lack of a specific provision in the US Code meant that defendants needed to face a range of other charges to be brought before a criminal process. In that indictment, the 4 Iran-based defendants were charged in federal court because they hired a private investigative firm based in the US and used the US financial system, which is prohibited to agents of the Islamic Republic. But many other acts leading up to the kidnapping plot encompass transnational repression. For example, Iranian officials pressured her family with offers of payment to lure her to meet them in a third country where she could be more easily abducted. They also imprisoned her brother on unfounded national security charges simply to exert pressure on Ms. Alinejad. These are all acts of transnational repression intended to target a US person, but they do not fall neatly within existing US criminal law. If you look at the DOJ indictments against PRC actors engaging in transnational repression, you'll see a similar pattern of charging. Now, there is a piece of legislation that could identify that, that could address that, and we can get into that a bit in the Q&A. But as lawmakers consider these proposals, jurisdictional reach needs to be a key consideration. It has to be expansive enough to protect victims. In Title 18 of the US Code, we already have jurisdiction over a broad range of international crimes like torture, genocide, war crimes. We need to have that expansive jurisdiction because, for example, if foreign family members of a political dissident are being targeted by a foreign state, and that political dissident has recently arrived in the US as a refugee or asylum seeker, that would not be covered. And so we need to seek to include that. I'll quickly touch on a few other things, including that short of a criminal statute on transnational repression, you could have something like an extraterritorial federal criminal statute for extrajudicial killings, which would also cover a key component of this. The last thing that I'll touch on is how another critical aspect of this problem is how to identify and address threats posed to US citizens and residents by US allies, not adversaries. A huge part of my work is focused on the threat that US adversaries pose. However, it's also carried out by authoritarian governments with strategic partnerships with the US conditioned on aid packages, arms deals, political support, and trade relationships. This includes Egypt, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, even India, Rwanda. But a lot of the people who are targeted by this have a feeling that the US government would not have their support if they come forward and give information about these threats because of those special relationships. So in the Q&A, I'd love to discuss a bit further how we can encourage those communities to come forward with that valuable information.
Thank you, Ms. Nia, and thank you all for your testimony, incredibly enlightening, and I think we'll have a good discussion. Members will be recognized in order of seniority for their 5 minutes of questionings, and an additional round of questioning may be called after all members have been recognized. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning, and before I start, I'd like to insert, for the record, a statement from the Sikh Coalition to this committee. So ordered with unanimous consent. Mr. Fu, I'll start with you. Thank you for being here. You mentioned several recommendations, in the story of being surrounded and hearing the chanting of elimination of Bob Fu outside your home. I mean, I just can't imagine how that feels and the impact that that has on you and your family. And in one of your recommendations, and I didn't think I was going to go this way, but you talked about the elimination of the ability for the CCP or its entities to be able to purchase property in the United States. Can you tell us why that's a recommendation and how that helps with transnational repression?
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I want to respectfully request the Chairman to allow me to submit that document I sent to the committee staff. It was a filed document to the U.S. District Court for West Texas, documenting the whole full detail of what had happened to my house and the evacuation. Yeah, I want to submit that as a permanent record for this hearing. And in regarding to the my recommendation on the legislation to ban the CCP to build a permanent operation basis in the U.S. soil, we have witnessed how the Chinese the CCP operating a spy balloon hovering, on our sovereign sky. But I think the more dangerous thing is we allow them to buy strategic assets, especially the physical, the lands, and many, even in our Texas soil, we have seen hundreds of thousands of acres were purchased. Some were right next to our military base. I think, for the CCP, they're not satisfied with just soft power kind of posturing. They are, as multiple FBI chiefs from our region told me, that they are very patient. They can just start planting a small plant in West Texas, but with a purpose to infiltrate and to harass, and then to make destructive efforts. Even in the city of Midland, Texas, they would do that. I remember the first year when I moved to West Texas, our local FBI chief showed me names on his palm. I mean, written. Basically, of course, he walked me on the street and said, "Do you know these people? These are white Caucasian Americans in different with different associations around Texas." And the FBI said they had intercepted their messages and showing these people are hired by the Chinese government, CCP funded directly, in order to disrupt China aid and our communication and our freedom advancement effort. So we can't allow, I think, them to build this permanent basis. It's nothing to do, again, I mean, some try to frame it, including the CCP, as a propaganda, like this is somehow is a Chinese racial profiling or racist, ethnic bias. No, this is about our national security. So that's why I think it's time for Congress to pass the legislation. And I applaud some state has taken the initiative already.
Thank you very much. And I'll move to Mr. Freedom. And I know time runs very quickly. We previously held a hearing in Energy and Commerce on TikTok. Your account was banned previously. In the middle of that, while I was questioning you, the Chinese Communist Party and their alliances with TikTok immediately reinstated it. Can you tell us how digital authoritarianism has affected you and how it affects other people in this repression?
Of course, we were worried about, the Chinese spy balloon over our head, but people need to understand that we literally have 160 million spy apps in our phone and listen in every conversation that we have. I actually got a second phone and downloaded TikTok to post things about, China's human rights violations. Literally a week later, they banned my account. And I was like, well, I thought they were free speech and freedom. And as you guys know that you guys had a hearing with the CEO of TikTok, and while you guys were asking them the questions, why did you guys, ban Enes Freedom's account, they unbanned me, And later on, Washington Post actually did a whole investigation. They found out that they did ban my account. Also, the CEO of TikTok was lying and said we didn't ban his account and everything. But it's a shame because right now there are millions of kids out there in America being brainwashed the Chinese Communist Party, and TikTok is literally ruining the generations.
My time has expired, and the chair now recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Magaziner, for his questioning.
Well, thank you, Chairman. And on this topic, 5 minutes is not nearly enough, but we're doing our best here. Ms. Boyajian, can you just give us sort of a high level in the United States, which is the jurisdiction of this committee? What are the most typical forms of transnational repression? What are the most prevalent tactics that we should be focusing on U.S. soil?
Thank you for the question. I would note that we do have a country case study on the U.S. if anyone is interested in learning more. In terms of our database, which is looking at those direct physical threats, the number of U.S. cases is actually low, in part because we're more protected. So that case study does describe some of the typical tactics. So we hear all the time from activists that we work with, like folks sitting next to me, that they receive threatening messages via social media or even via phone call, that their family members back home are threatened, sometimes even beaten up or jailed. It is common to be surveilled. Individuals in the United States were targeted with Pegasus spyware. We actually had a case of one activist, he's Hong Kong American, wanted for arrest in Hong Kong because of his own activism to the US government about human rights abuses in Hong Kong. So he was at home in his apartment in California, heard a strange noise, looked outside, and saw a drone hovering outside his apartment, apparently taking pictures. That is the only story we've heard like that. Of course, he didn't leap off his balcony and tackle the drone and prove that it was linked to the government, but it's certainly suspicious. So those are common tactics, but we do see governments being increasingly brazen. The recent India case, Ahmadinejad, folks being beaten up in California that I talked about.
Thank you. Ms. Nia, you in your testimony, spoke about the legal steps that we could take to give prosecutors more tools to go after transnational repression. I want to give you some time now to expand on that. You referenced a couple of pieces of legislation that are already pending. Do they incorporate your recommendations, or is there more that we could be doing and should be looking at legislatively in order to incorporate your suggestions into the code?
Thank you. Yeah, the Stop Transnational Repression Act actually deals with many of the recommendations that I've made in the past and that others have made, including a provision on extrajudicial killings and also having that extraterritorial jurisdiction. I think a few things may need to be workshopped as it goes along, and also in consultation with prosecutors at the DOJ and so on, but that pretty adequately covers a lot of those provisions. So I definitely recommend folks looking at that. I'll also note that there are civil litigation options that are also available that I think we need to touch on and that could be important. So under the terrorism exception to the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act, individuals, of course, can sue state sponsors of terrorism. That includes the Islamic Republic of Iran, Syria, North Korea, and Cuba, all of whom do engage in this sort of activity. But right now, it's only possible if the plaintiffs were US nationals at the time the act occurred. There is a legislative proposal that some offices here have been briefed on and that others have been briefed on that would allow individuals to sue if they are US nationals or lawful permanent residents at the time the claim is brought. And because that provision deals with torture, extrajudicial killing, and hostage taking, that could allow newly arrived dissidents who are the target of transnational repression to hold the governments of their origin countries accountable. The other quick thing I'll touch on is that in terms of exceptions to the FSIA, the Homeland and Cyber Threat Act has been introduced and reintroduced before the House since 2019. That would partly address transnational repression by allowing dissidents who are US nationals to sue foreign states that launch cyber attacks against them. But I'll note that this does not account for private companies and their facilitation of the sale of spyware used against dissidents, which is one of the hallmarks of the transnational repression patterns we look at. A series of judgments from the US Supreme Court have restricted the possibilities for corporate liability, and this negatively impacts the ability of US-based non-citizen dissidents to sue companies involved in surveillance. So I would recommend that those hurdles in US domestic law be addressed and removed.
All right, thank you. My time has expired. I'll yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop, for his questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to particularly acknowledge the examples of Dr. Fu and Mr. Freedom, your personal examples to the world. You inspire others to embrace and stand courageously for freedom in the face of these threats from nation-state actors abroad. You know, I was listening with interest to your testimony, Dr. Fu, about the things we allow, the allowance of purchasing land next to military bases, and I've listened with interest to the legislative proposals for change. One of the things that's interesting to me, in your example, Mr. Freedom speaks to it loudly, is some of the wealthiest American business interests that engage and advance their own economic success with the Chinese Communist Party or in China, seemingly without regard to the abuses that you're describing. Some think that you've been retaliated against by the NBA. When I was a legislator in North Carolina, the NBA moved its All-Star game out of my own hometown of Charlotte over a bill that was designed to provide privacy and protection for women in particular in private circumstances. And yet the NBA, what you're describing is that the Chinese Communist Party is engaged in repression at home and abroad. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, it's correct.
Why do you believe that a business as powerful and world-renowned as the NBA would condemn things like that at home, but say nothing about the abuses by the Chinese Communist Party that reach out across the world.
Thank you for your question. So during COVID in 2020, NBA took us to we call it NBA bubble. And even every coach, every assistant coach, everyone from the NBA said, we are not here to play basketball. We are here to talk about social justice that are happening in America. That's all we care about.
Okay.
They put the BLM logos on the floor. They put phrases behind our jersey, which was controlled by the NBA. We couldn't pick. So if you wanted to pick stand with Taiwan, stand with Hong Kong, we were not allowed to pick it. So they were controlling every word. And every after game, we were having conversation about social justice or happening in America. We even said, you know what, we're not even playing basketball. So a few years later, I started to call out about, China for their human rights violations and political prisoners and stuff. I mean, right now, there are close to 3 million Uyghurs in concentration camp getting tortured and raped every day. I mean, look at what's happening in Tibet. It's pretty much a cultural genocide. I'm sure you guys know about what's happening in Hong Kong and Taiwan. So I started to, put these messages on my shoes, because if you're a kid and if you're watching NBA, you're not watching the game, you're watching the shoes and see which shoes is the coolest so you can buy those shoes. So I literally put this simple messages on my shoes: free Tibet, free, Uyghurs, stand with Hong Kong, stand with Taiwan. And I remember a minute before the game, 2 gentlemen from the NBA that were working for Boston Celtics came to me and said, take your shoes off. I was like, excuse me? They said, your shoes has been getting so much attention internationally, you gotta take them off. And I was like, am I breaking any rules? They said, no, but you have to take them off. So it was the perfect moment for me, because I was just getting ready for my citizenship test. So I closed my eyes. I was like, okay, there are 27 amendments. My first amendment, freedom of speech. I turned around and said, no, this is my freedom of speech. I'm not taking them off. And first half, I went back to my locker room and I saw the text message from my manager. He said, every Celtics game is banned in China. It literally took them 24 minutes, first half, first quarter, 12 minutes, second quarter, 12 minutes, 24 minutes to ban every Celtics game in television. So the second half started. That game, I played 0 minutes, which I played every game before that. And obviously, we lost the game. And after the game, right, there was this huge media storm. Every media outlet wanted to talk to me. I was like, you know what? I'm not doing this for attention. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do any media. So after the game, MBPA called me, the Player Association. They said, you know what you did. You can now wear those shoes ever again. We've been getting so much pressure from the NBA. It literally said free Tibet. I was like, am I breaking any rules? They said no. I was like, but they said you can never wear them ever again. So they pressured me so much. I was like, you know what? I promise you, I'm not going to wear free Tibet shoes ever again. They said, promise? I said, promise. I hang up the phone. So the next game, I wore free Uyghur shoes. So they called me after the game. They said, you're a liar. You lied to us. How could you do that to us? I was like, first of all, I never lied to you. I never said I'm not going to wear free Uyghur shoes. I just said I'm just not going to wear free Tibet shoes. And then later on, I realized that, the relationship between NBA and China is around like $5 billion. And more people watch NBA games in China than American population last year. So I was like, you know what? I want to call out the hypocrisy. I want to expose them. I know it's going to, cost me my career, but it is what it is. Someone has to do it.
Mr. Freedom and Dr. Fu, thank you for lighting the flame of freedom and protecting it. Mr. Chairman, I have to yield back. My time's expired, but I want to ask unanimous consent to submit for the record the document that Dr. Fu referred to in his testimony.
So ordered.
You bet.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa, for his questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and Ranking Member for holding the most important hearing, and I also want to associate myself with the comments made by my colleagues here about the importance of this hearing. Your bravery, your integrity, showing up at this hearing is much appreciated. Members of Congress, I came here a number of years ago and I found out that as much as we want to plan long-term, we end up managing by crisis. We're trying to catch the next one and put out that fire before the other 2 or 3 light up. And We need good information to make good decisions here. The American public needs to know also, needs to have good, relevant information. I think this country, we are blessed because the way we founded, the way we wrote our Constitution, the First Amendment guarantees freedom of speech, freedom of the press. That's sunshine, transparency, that helps a lot in keeping corruption at the minimum and also helps us in making good decisions. So, you know, as I've traveled, as I looked at other parts of the world, I noticed that one thing that is in danger out there are the lives of reporters. Every time you turn around, a reporter's getting assassinated, imprisoned somewhere around the world because they've criticized a local government, a narco trafficking organization. They've stepped on somebody's toes. And so my question to you is, knowing that we didn't know about your stories here, but people need to know about your stories, how can we get them out into the public? How can we essentially help reporters do their job, and hopefully they don't get knocked off or assassinated somewhere? And the same could be said about our social media platforms. How can we make sure that the social media, Mr. Freedom, you talked about some instances of essentially, you know, your comments, your statements, your image being essentially filtered out. Thoughts about how we can move ahead and make sure that, you know, that doesn't happen. Mr. Freedom, I'll start with you.
So about the journalists right now, it is real because
It's a big issue.
very big issue because Turkey, for example, my home country right now, you know, Turkey is, I believe, leading the jailing journalists in the world, and these people are just, their job is to write. They're innocent people, you know. And actually, I have many of friends in jail right now suffering just because of they were innocent journalists. But the social media danger is actually real, because I remember first time I started to have a conversation about, you know, the China and their human rights violations. I had some conversation with some people in government, and they said, listen, you're an NBA player, you're a single NBA player. From now on going forward, you will be getting text messages, you'll be getting WhatsApp calls, Instagram DMs, or social media DMs from one of the most beautiful girls in the world. Do not answer them, they're Chinese spies. I promise you, for the last year and a half, I have been getting lots of messages from girls, very beautiful girls. I don't even know if they really want me, or they're spies, you know? So it's very confusing, danger is real, but what breaks my...
As well,
Okay.
if I can, Ms. Moynihan.
Yeah, I would just expand on your very excellent and correct point. We had a report come out in December that was focused on transnational repression against journalists, and it is a tactic that we see increasing. So of the 854 cases in our database, 112 of those, 13% of all of our cases, involved journalists. They are under extreme threat, and so a key way that we can support free speech is helping support these journalists when they face threat. We have a Freedom in the World report that looks at political rights and civil liberties around the world. We just had the 50th anniversary of our report last year, and that report showed that freedom of expression is one of the first areas targeted and has seen a steep decline. And so I think...
Ms. Nia, in my 17 seconds left.
I was just going to say that on the topic of journalism, we also need to recognize sort of new media journalists that don't always fall into the definition of traditional journalists, but who face those very same exact risks. So I would recognize that under the law.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm out of time, so I yield.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. D'Esposito.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think what we've realized today is that the Chinese Communist Party is a threat. Well, certainly it's a threat to Mr. Freedom's love life, but it is also a threat to our freedom, it's a threat to your freedom, and it's a threat to national security. And before coming to Congress, I was blessed and lucky enough to serve as a member of the New York City Police Department, retired there as a detective, and had a pretty good understanding of the men and women who were law enforcement professionals in New York, and never once did I see a patch on anyone's uniform from the Chinese Communist Party. But as you all know, we discovered a Chinese police station where the purpose was for officers to monitor, harass, and intimidate Chinese dissidents. Dr. Fu, in your testimony, you shared the things that you and your family have endured back home. And as someone who has been targeted by the Chinese Communist Party, not only do these bold actions surprise you, but if you could imagine, I mean, how many other cities and places throughout this country is this happening?
Thank you, Congressman. This kind of activities by the CCP, I think, has been happening to multiple cities. Actually, even during the period of time where my house was being surrounded, by those mask-wearing thugs from San Francisco to New York and Houston. They were bused there, living in luxury hotels in Odessa, Texas. It happened in Toronto, it happened in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Virginia. I have a friend, actually, who is a social YouTuber, a broadcaster, who has a huge following. His name is Wu Jianmin. He was a former Tiananmen Square student leader. And his house was being also surrounded in California. And the California police basically told him when his house was totally surrounded and his children could not even go to school. And he was told, if you stop broadcasting your dissident program on YouTube, these people will leave. So that's their sole purpose. They want to silence our voice.
And I think what's scary about it is it's not being hidden. This is right out in the open, and they are very clear about the threats that they're posing to all of us. I appreciate that. I just want to switch gears for a second. Ms. Boyajian, you mentioned in your testimony the possibility of a federal law enforcement training center training on transnational repression. And I know that FLETC does a lot of work across the nation. As a matter of fact, I partnered with them this morning back home on Long Island with Congressman Garbarino and Lolota hosting a human trafficking awareness training. What would the benefits of developing a FLETC training specific to this, what benefits would it serve to local law enforcement agencies?
I think if you develop a course at FLETC, you have the benefit of being able to get standardized training to a high number of individuals, because it's not just local law enforcement coming through, obviously, it's other federal agencies, it's even partners, state level, and being able to have that standardized training. I think there are a lot of ways you can do the training also. It could be flexible, could be in person, could be virtual, could be, I think it is very important when folks are new, they're inundated with trainings, being able to have training throughout the course of someone's career would also be very important.
So I agree with you. I think that there's a need for standardized training in law enforcement and when it comes to other issues as well. Can you talk briefly, we got about 40 seconds to go, how familiar, I know we mentioned federal law enforcement agencies, but obviously communication is key. How familiar is state and local law enforcement with the issue of transnational repression?
Not very. I would say it wildly varies. So for the state and local folks who have diaspora communities that are targeted, New York and California, for example, the FBI has been working extensively with them. DHS is also doing community engagement. But our federalized system makes it tricky, and so bang for your buck. If there's a way to get a high number of individuals at once, there's much more that needs to be done there.
There's only so much they can do with the resources they have, so it seems like we have work to do. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Goldman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for putting together this hearing. I appreciate, I think it's a very important issue for all of us in all of our districts, and it's nice to have some bipartisanship here. I come from the 10th District of New York, Lower Manhattan and Northwest Brooklyn, home to Manhattan's historic Chinatown and Brooklyn's growing Chinatown. It's also the district where those two arrests were of the sort of outpost CCP police station. And it is of significant concern to many members of my community because, Mr. Fu, as you just said, the point is to silence people. And it is not necessarily to have people removed or to send them back to China, but it is just simply to make sure that they are not speaking out against the Chinese government, and in my district, often that also means in support of the Taiwanese government. Several of you have talked about the two bills that are pending or have been introduced in Congress, the Stop Transnational Repression Act and the, I always get it mixed up, the Transnational Repression Policy Act, both of which I am a co-sponsor of. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is the importance of allowing the Department of Justice to take the lead because of connections between some of these dissident police stations with organized crime. And maybe Ms. Boyajian, you can address, what research you have done on those connections.
Sure, so there's an organization called Safeguard Defenders that did the police stations report that many of you are referring to. I would say in terms of which law enforcement entity is best placed, I think this is an issue that crosses jurisdictions, and there's a very important role for DOJ, for the FBI, for Homeland Security investigations. We don't have access to the information that would let us say, aha, these folks are best, but there is an absolute need for folks to coordinate. And I don't know, Gisu, perhaps you have more you'd want to add on that component.
I would just say that, honestly, I yield my time because I'm sure other people have more things to say on this, yeah.
I appreciate that, and I think it's very noteworthy that we do have two pieces of legislation that are bipartisan, and I certainly would hope that as we move past these budget discussions, that some of these bipartisan pieces of legislation can come to the floor and become law, because as you all have explained, I think very well, the need to address this issue is becoming more and more acute. Ms. Boyajian, the interesting thing is if we move away, I think, from China, where else do you see the transnational repression growing?
So we actually are going to be releasing updated database numbers in mid-February. I'm very sorry I was not allowed to leak it today. I would say we do see an increasing number of governments engaging in transnational repression. This is in part because technology makes it so cheap and easy to target folks even after they have fled abroad. But we do have concerns in the United States, particularly with some of the countries I mentioned, so Saudi Arabia, Rwanda, China, Belarus, Turkey. We hear firsthand accounts from folks from those countries being targeted, primarily for surveillance and harassment and threats.
And then finally, Mr. Freedom, I want to go to you because Turkey has been, and Mr. Erdogan in particular, has been increasingly in the news as he continues to crack down on your fellow native Turkish folks. And I guess from your perspective, what should we be paying close attention to as it relates to Mr. Erdogan and the Turkish government?
So, thank you for your question. So Turkey is a NATO ally, but I feel like it does not act like a NATO ally. I believe Turkey is the Trojan horse for Putin in NATO. Actually, just recently, Erdogan started to put bounty on people's head. And these are innocent journalists, these are innocent civilians, and many of them is actually American citizen that lives in the U.S. I think, condemning this kind of, I say, dictatorships is not enough. I believe we need concrete actions. I believe we need to put Magnitsky sanctions on individuals in Turkey, and I believe that will shake up the whole regime, because Erdogan, I don't think he understands from a soft talk, and soft talk against the dictatorships never work. So there's actually a bill that we are going to put out there is Turkey Human Rights Prevention Act. So once we put it out there, I hope that many members of the Congress will sign it and pass it. It's asking to put Magnitsky sanctions on individuals and asking to care about human rights and literally free the political prisoners over there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Crane, for his questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing today. Thank you guys for coming. I want to especially thank Dr. Fu and Mr. Freedom for your leadership and courage on this issue. I know it can't be easy to do that. And I hope that Americans that are watching this, a lot of Americans, Mr. Freedom, look up to you because you were good at basketball, and God blessed you with height and skill and all that. But I hope Americans watching this really appreciate your courage, because you're one of the few that actually is willing to set aside their own personal career and their ability to gain, resources and fame and all that for something bigger. So thank you for doing that. Now I want to ask you guys some serious questions. Neither of you guys were born here, Dr. Fu or Mr. Freedom, right? You guys weren't born here in America, but you came here to this country, right? Hoping to maybe have a better life. Would you say that? Thank you. Mr. Freedom, did you ever think that when you came to the United States of America, you'd see Chinese spy balloons flying over the country?
Definitely not.
Did you think that or this is for you too, Dr. Fu, did you think you would encounter this type of repression from the Chinese Communist Party? Did you think it'd be allowed here in the United States of America?
Definitely not. It was very surreal, even when those people showed up in West Texas. I remember some of our cowboys are trying to work something out, but our church actually encouraged to give them water, to love them instead. But this is very surreal. I think.
I bet.
Yeah.
Mr. Freedom, why do you think it's allowed here? Why do you think we allow Chinese police stations here in the United States of America? Why do you think you see Chinese spy balloons flying over the U.S.? Why do you think individuals like you and Dr. Fu are oppressed here as American citizens?
The more I research, the more I realize NBA is not the only one. You see Hollywood, Wall Street, academias, big tech, Wall Street, many of them is partly controlled by the Chinese government because of money.
Money. That's right. That's what it is, isn't it, sir? It's not just the NBA.
Not just NBA, no.
Both of you guys count on the United States government to some extent for your own protection. Is that correct?
Sure. Yes.
Yeah. Money. Does it bother either of you guys? And you guys are both truth tellers, and you guys have a lot of courage to be here, but I'm going to take it one step further. Does it bother either of you guys that this current administration and the family of this current administration has taken money, millions of dollars from the CCP? Does that bother you, Mr. Freedom? Does it concern you?
Yes, of course.
Dr. Fu, does it concern you?
Of course, it's very concerning. This is just a reflection of how the CCP's effort for years. It's not just for in the past few years, but I just feel it's very concerning to see when a group of dissidents, welcoming the Taiwan president in Manhattan, on the street of Manhattan in New York, and 5 were beaten violently and sent to hospital by the Chinese government-hired thugs on our soil, and so far, no one is being held accountable.
Yeah,
Not a
that's
single
interesting.
one. Why?
Dr. Fu, do you think that we have the Hunter Biden laptop, which has all sorts of, very, disturbing information, photographs, text messages, emails on it? Do you think that CCP might have their own copy, their own information on the president's son, Mr. Freedom?
Of course, not only him, but whoever is using TikTok. Yes, they have all their informations. And
Yeah,
160 million people.
That's interesting. Mr. Freedom, are you aware of the fact that Hunter Biden, James Biden, Sarah Jones Biden, Haley Biden, Kathleen Buell, Melissa Cohen, Hunter Biden's current wife, 2 children of Joe Biden's sons, Joe Biden's brother's child have all received money that was doled out from that originated from foreign countries?
I know some of it, but I didn't know the whole thing.
Yeah. Are either of you familiar with the term elite capture? Elite capture?
No.
That's where a foreign country uses money and other things to influence and often co-opt high-ranking officials. Are you guys familiar with that?
Well, I actually tried to have a meeting with President Biden and also someone from his administration, and I got turned down every time.
Imagine
the Turkish
that.
government put a bounty on my head, actually, and I was like, I'm a U.S. citizen, and a foreign government is doing it in U.S. soil. This is unacceptable, and I would like to talk to my president or someone from the administration. One of the senator, who's a Democrat, said this is not going to happen because, unfortunately, the president is scared of Erdogan because Erdogan is a NATO ally, and he doesn't want to piss him off.
Well, the last thing I want to say, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving me extra time. Again, thank you, guys. What you are doing is monstrously courageous, and we appreciate you guys. And I think it's pathetic that you've come here to the United States, and this is what the country has turned into. So thank you guys for doing what you're doing. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Nevada, Ms. Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses. Nice to see you again, Mr. Freedom. Before we get too carried away throwing out accusations about children taking money because they're part of the Biden family, let me remind you, it's not just about taking money. There are situations where the person who is in the White House has rented rooms to people from foreign countries in his hotel, whose daughter has made franchise deals with certain foreign powers, who has sold products and scholarships to certain foreign powers. So let's be a little careful about how we throw out those accusations. People in glass houses, you know the saying. But what I want to talk about is my district, Las Vegas. We're the home of a lot of big events. New Year's Eve, we had the F1 race. We're going to have the Super Bowl is coming up. So there's a lot of transit, a lot of people in and out, a lot of people from all over the world. And so what's happened is that the FBI in Las Vegas has announced a new awareness program, and it's in coordination with our U.S. attorney and a digital solutions company to try to put out information, try to gather information, try to see if some of this kind of transnational repression might be going on or passing through the district. I just wonder if any of you, and we'll start with you, Ms. Boagian, is that close enough? Are aware of these kind of programs in other major cities, if they work, how we could do them better, how you see that playing out?
Public-private partnerships on this issue in coordination with law enforcement are very important. Our understanding is that actually the billboards in Las Vegas are some of the first of its kind in terms of an awareness-raising effort. It can be a challenge for communities that have traditionally been targeted by law enforcement in their home country to then have law enforcement as the primary interlocutor with them. It can be a very scary thing. And so government has been making an effort to partner with trusted civil society organizations and do some of this community outreach. And that is an effective way. That's a one-off and it can be slow, but that can be very effective, yes.
We have a center, like a fusion center, where a lot of this information is shared and law enforcement goes on across government bodies, state, local, federal, as well as with private entities, because Las Vegas probably has the best eye in the sky private security of any place around, and so to take advantage of that, I think is a good idea.
Yeah, and it's great for folks to understand, okay, these are the rights I have here in the United States, here's digital security trainings I can take, this is where I report if I'm targeted.
I believe you also mentioned that there are some steps that Congress can take, and one of the things would be codifying what transnational repression is, or so we can go after it through more legal means. Would you talk a little more about that, and what are some of the legal things we can do besides maybe sanctions or?
Establishing a definition is very, very important because everything else you do stems from that. What is transnational repression? All of your trainings, your criminal law will stem from that. Your ability to support folks who have been targeted, your ability to welcome people who might need emergency visas, all of that stems from that definition. And I would also, if I may, accountability has come up a lot during this hearing, and rightly so. It's a very important point. And I would say there are two big ways that we can strengthen accountability in the United States. As we are more aware of this issue happening on US soil, it is very, very important that we impose meaningful measures of accountability. So when we can charge with criminal law, we should. When we can impose sanctions, we should. I do wonder if the United States and other democracies had imposed more meaningful accountability measures on folks involved in the murder of Jamal Khashoggi from Saudi Arabia, would we have seen India allegedly doing what it was doing? And I think the other key piece that I know you are also engaged on is there is the misconception that abuses abroad have no impact on us here in the United States. And in fact, as you can see, transnational repression, it illustrates starkly how that is not the case. And so you all are dealing with the budget now. Investment in human rights and democracy overseas will help strengthen the security of Americans.
Do some other countries have definitions that they use that we might find helpful?
So there's some interesting work. Sweden has a law on refugee espionage. So that is, it is illegal there if you're coming and specifically surveilling refugee communities, and we have shared that. Some countries deal with this as foreign interference, but actually the United States really is looked to as the leader as we engage with other governments. They have also been engaging with FBI and others to really figure out what should a definition look like.
Thank you. Now yield back.
Generally's time has expired. We will now enter a second round of questioning. I've been very lenient on the time. However, I know there are multiple other hearings and members have other commitments, so I will end it right at 5 minutes. Just a fair warning to everybody when you hear the gavel. And I'll now recognize myself. We talked about some of the other things that can be done, and I think this highlights, and especially my colleague Mr. Diaz-Bazito was talking about some of the efforts. I think this highlights why DHS, specifically HSI, should be involved in combating transnational repression and how they can work with the FBI. So we're going to continue to look at that and already have a plan here in this committee. Mr. Freedom, I will ask my Democrat colleagues to help you get that meeting with the president. I think it's incredibly important. And I think he would want to hear what you have to say. And very briefly, I mean, what's the message in 30 seconds or less that you want to deliver?
It actually really, shocked me and broke my heart because I asked the senator, I was like, listen, I want to talk to him about my family situation. What can we do to help people over there? Because there are thousands of people are suffering over there. And I don't want to talk about the politics side of it. I want to talk about the human rights and political prisoners over there. And when he turned around and said to me, well, just because of Turkey is a NATO ally and pretty much President Biden is afraid of, Erdogan, this meeting is not going to happen. And I started to ask this question myself. We are in America. We're talking about the most powerful man in the world. We're talking about the most powerful house in the world. How can this happen? But if I have a conversation with him, I will definitely sit down and talk about my family situation because I have not seen them for 10 years just because I wanted to talk about the violations over there, But I hope this meeting can happen and we can sit down and find some concrete actions because these kind of dictatorships, they don't care about, condemning or soft talk.
Well, thank you for that. In your testimony, previously you mentioned how the different areas are being used, whether it's Wall Street, potentially academia. This is something that this committee has actually studied, which is the Confucius Institutes, and we have legislation that would limit those institutes that are taking money from CCP-linked entities that they would not be able to receive federal aid. So I want to start with, actually I'll start just down the line. We have 2.5 minutes left, so Ms. Boyajian, can you tell us the link between Confucius Institutes and transnational repression and give us examples?
I can't give you super detailed examples, but we have done work looking at Confucius Institutes, and also there are Confucius classrooms, which is the K through 12 age group. And there have been reports, in order to get hired there, you have to be vetted by folks linked with the PRC. So freedom of speech is limited, and there have been anecdotal reports of folks being surveilled when they participate in those.
So do you believe that Confucius Institutes are or have been used in order to repress thought, ideas, and even students?
Certainly to repress freedom of expression, and it's theoretically possible beyond that.
Dr. Fu?
The whole Confucius Institute and its mechanism, and including the so-called Confucius classroom, they even proposed to establish Confucius classroom in every Texas public school, and it was fortunately it was killed. But the whole thing was totally, fully, completely funded by the Chinese Communist Party's funding. And all their teachers had been vetted, recruited, the Communist Party loyalists with ideological-driven agenda to come here. So it is a very clear state-sponsored, to say the least, it's a propaganda, but it's more than that. More likely, it's an intelligence gathering.
And
They
I'll
wouldn't
go to-
invite me and Mr. Freedom to be there to do a lecture.
I'll go to Ms. Nia now. And any insight onto this?
Yeah, I agree with what my fellow witnesses say, and I also want to say that this playbook is replicated by other countries as well. So the Islamic Republic of Iran has cultural centers here that are very much intended to carry out a lot of this same activity, and we can go down the list, but it's very important to keep that in mind. The other thing that I'll say is just on the global point, that because we have such a focus here on what the CCP is doing and to protect Uyghurs and others who are in their line of fire, we also have to look at US allies like Saudi Arabia and Egypt who are repatriating Uyghur dissidents back to China. This is why the global coordination piece, and along with our allies, is so key.
Do you believe it's important for President Biden to meet with Mr. Enes Kanter Freedom?
Of course.
Thank you. My time has expired. I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Magaziner.
Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Nia, in your testimony, you wrote about the use of red notices, Interpol red notices, to try to force detention and extradition of targets of transnational repression, and I believe this, if I heard correctly, I believe that Mr. Freedom has experienced this. Can you explain just a little bit more about how that works and what, if anything, can be done about it?
Absolutely. There is a lot of discussion of reform of Interpol. Interpol's leadership is also headed by human rights violators, so I should note that this is sort of an institutional problem because we don't really have people at the helm that are sort of espousing the values that we'd like to see there. But a typical example of this would be if a country issues some sort of extradition notice or requests that somebody come back to their country. Normally the charges are terrorism or something that might be trumped up and not fully supported, and then these sort of red notices are issued. So a lot of times the institution is weaponized. A lot of Hollywood movies have made it seem like there's a sort of Interpol law enforcement. That's not really how this goes, right? So we know that it's really reliant on the national authorities in the different countries where the alleged perpetrators or suspects are to take action. And so that's why it's so important to inform from the local to the national levels around the world about what transnational repression is, why a Uyghur dissident is not a terrorist, and to really go through that understanding because a lot of law enforcement is just not aware.
Okay, thank you. And then, Dr. Fu and Mr. Freedom, again, we thank you very much for your courage in telling your stories. But as you both have noted, you are hardly the only people in the United States or elsewhere who have been the victims of this type of harassment. Using this public platform that we have, just from a human level, what advice or encouragement do you have to others who may be experiencing similar things and don't know what to do about it Dr. Fu.
Thank you. I would encourage, number one, better coordination between the federal and the local law enforcement. I think whenever this happens, these cases for transnational repression on the street of Manhattan or San Francisco, there should be real law enforcement follow-up. I mean, those perpetrators should be held accountable. And also, I think the member of Congress should not be hired by the CCP to lobby for their repression tools. I mean, I'm not talking. This is not really a partisan issue, and the CCP really, hired members from both parties. I mean, you have a former Speaker John Boehner of Republican, you have this former Senator Joe Lieberman. They're all hired as a CCP lobbyist to really engaging this kind of campaign. I think that's really an embarrassment. I think we should discourage them to do so.
Well, thank you, Dr. Fu. And Mr. Freedom, I'm a big Boston Celtics fan, so I've rooted for you on the court, and we're all rooting for you off the court now. So, to others who have experienced the type of harassment that you have, what would you say to them, and what advice would you have?
Well, first of all, I want to say, just speak up. But unfortunately, many of my teammates are scared to speak up. I remember once we were going through this stuff, many of them come up to me and said, we love you, we support you, keep doing what you're doing, but don't expect us to go out there and, speak up for you. Because I was like, why? They said, well, we have shoe deals, endorsement deals, we want to get another contract. I asked them one simple question. I was like, put yourself in their shoes. If your mother, if your sister, if your daughter was in those concentration camps, getting tortured and raped every day, would you still pick money and business over your morals, values, and principles? They usually turn around and leave the room. So I feel like we have to put some kind of, pressure on these organizations and companies, because look at what Nike is doing. Nike speaks for Black Lives Matter in America, Latino community, LGBTQ community, no Asian hate. But when it comes to China, everybody knows about this slave labor. So we gotta do whatever we can to hold these companies and organizations accountable, because they're making billions of dollars and they care about this. Problems are happening in America, but anywhere else, they're silent. And whoever speaks up about these issues, they are trying to shut them off. So we gotta put some kind of, pressure on these organizations.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent for Ms. Jackson-Lee to sit with the subcommittee and question today's witnesses.
So ordered. The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop.
This hearing gets more and more interesting. I'm going to sort of return to the subject, Mr. Freedom, that you spoke about. Well, we in the last time I had an opportunity to ask questions about, and you've spoken about it more, the NBA's role, but not just the NBA. And before I ask you a question, Dr. Fu, I'm actually going to you. In the moment, or the time since I asked last questions, I had an opportunity. Staff brought me the complaint that you described in your testimony about the people who were incited to protest outside your house. And I see that the defendant in that, and I hate even to say this in public, but it's Guo Wingui, is that how you say the name? Miles Kuo, as we see that name.
Yes.
And as I've just done a little research on him, he appears in my social media thread a lot. I mean, not him personally, but people advocating for this person. I don't know anything about him. He said, I looked him up, and I understand he's a Chinese billionaire. He's under indictment. He just pleaded not guilty to a number of accusations in a superseding indictment, but he got out of your lawsuit when he filed a bankruptcy case in the District of Connecticut. Subsequently, that didn't go too well for him, so he sort of put that on ice, and he's alleged to have incited the same sort of harassment that you describe against the United States trustee in the bankruptcy proceeding that he was involved in. So, now, but do I understand that you contend that Mr. Miles Guo Wingui is acting on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party? Is that your allegation? I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong, but is that your allegation?
Yeah, when those people were sent by him from all over the United States to attack and harass me and my family, I was searching really very hard, like, what did I do to him? How much, I mean, I have nothing, no business dealings, no relationship with him prior at all. So there's the only conclusion is he must have a task to destroy our work of human rights and religious freedom.
And you believe he does that on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party?
I'm pretty sure he has a task.
So this gets to be very complicated. Ms. Nia, Ms. Boisian, you have, I mean, to the point, NBA, one of the things you spoke out about, Mr. Freedom, is that Nike, according to reports, came to the Hill and lobbied to weaken the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act that passed a couple of years ago. Yep. So was Nike acting on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party in trying to weaken that legislation as it was being considered by Congress?
I mean, yes. Look at the numbers. You know, there are really good players in the NBA, and there are many of them signed by Nike. And think about all the jersey sales, TV deals. Think about all the shoe sales and product sales in China. You know? So,
yeah.
yes.
Oh, no, I get it. And I get that their economic interests are linked, and I think it's reprehensible. I mean, I think those corporate America needs to show the courage that the two of you have shown. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate what you've done, but it begs this very interesting question. Ms. Nia, you're familiar with the FARA, Foreign Agents Registration Act, right? And the definition of what a foreign agent is, what an agent is in that legislation is quite broad compared to what an agent is considered in state law. Yep. So it can be somebody who's just carrying on the agenda of a foreign hostile power, right?
Yeah, and I'll note that there are some proposals for FARA reform in terms of wanting to have lawyers disclose, you know, who they're representing and things like that. But on the question of corporate liability, it gets quite sticky. In this country, we've had a lot of high court rulings. So the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled over and over again in a way that actually restricts the ability to hold corporations accountable for human rights violations and atrocity crimes, which do comprise a lot of the components of transnational repression that we're discussing here.
Would those conclusions be affected by the legislation that you've made reference to that's pending before Congress or not?
Yes.
Interesting. So that it gets pretty complicated, but at the end of the day, it works out to be probably a question of courage and of integrity. And well, you see a lot of actors in the picture, a lot of very wealthy people who are pursuing, as Mr. Crane said, money. But they allow, in the name of their making money, grotesque acts by hostile actors across the world. I appreciate the degree, you know, the way in which all of you have devoted your efforts to resisting that, and you're to be congratulated for it. Thank you very much.
Briefly on the point of proxies, very quickly, if I may, I would just flag two things for the committee. We do see an increasing use of sort of bad guys for hire. We also see the government of China, for example, engaging private investigators who did not know that they were involved in the commission of transnational oppression. And we would certainly say that corporations have a role to play. We see this through the use of spyware, where people are indiscriminately selling their products. And Commerce has listed some of these corporations on the entity list, but much more can be done there.
Very interesting. The gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. D'Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Freedom, so in 2019, you posted, or you tweeted, now X, listing some of the issues that you were facing at the time as a result of repression from the Chinese Communist Party. You said, in quote, "Haven't seen or talked to my family in 5 years. Jailed my dad, my siblings can't find jobs, revoked my passport, international arrest warrant, my family can't leave the country, got death threats every day, got attacked, harassed, tried to kidnap me in Indonesia. Freedom is not free." Now, as was asked by my good friend, Mr. Crane, you mentioned that you weren't born in the United States of America. Why did you come to the United States?
For the American dream, for freedom, for democracy, because, you know, growing up in Turkey, people look at America as the example of democracy, example of freedom, you know, example of opportunity. So that's why I was here.
How old were you when you came to the United States of America?
17 years old.
And at 17 years old, maybe you weren't thinking about Twitter, but did you ever think that you would be putting out or thinking that statement that you put out on Twitter?
Never, because all I cared about was, playing basketball and just having fun with my teammates.
Right. And who would in a million years thought that you'd come to the United States of America for freedom, for that thirst of democracy, for a better education, for opportunity, to give a better place for your children, your grandchildren, your family? But because of things that you said, clothing that you wore, feelings that you had, and the truth that you were telling, you were being targeted by the Chinese Communist Party. And you came to America, and I have to ask you, at that point when you're feeling all those things, who do you turn to?
I remember having a conversation with my agent after my third game wearing my, anti-CCP shoes. He called me and said, listen, I work for you, I don't work for the NBA, so I have to be honest with you. If you say another word, you're 29 years old, you'll be kicked out of the NBA, you're never gonna be able to dribble basketball ever again in this court. And also, this is going to cost you between $40 to $50 million. And I thought about myself, this is America. The biggest dictatorship in the world cannot control a 100% American-made company like NBA and fire a US citizen. So I was like, there's no way. And literally, that's what happened. And just because of I don't talk about politics, I talk about human rights. And human rights is above politics. So just because of I talk about these issues, I got kicked out of my, dream job that I worked so hard my whole life to get to that point. A lot of sweat, a lot of blood, a lot of effort. But you know what? In the end, people need to understand this is bigger than myself. This is bigger than basketball, and this is bigger than NBA. So I definitely don't regret it.
How's your family doing now?
I have not seen them over 10 years now, and I'm not even allowed to talk to them because when I started to speak out about it, the Erdogan, they came to my house and they raided the whole house and they took every electronics away because they wanted to see if I am still in contact with my family or not. They couldn't find no evidence, but they still took my dad in jail for a while. But, thanks to you guys, you put so much pressure from here to Turkey, they let him go. But right now, there's no communication because if they communicate with me, that's an act of a terrorism. So they can't even get a job in Turkey. I have to send my brother money, and my brother has to send my family money, So it's been very tough for my family, but I'm sure they're proud.
I have to say that there's probably going to be a lot that comes out of this subcommittee hearing today. But one of the things that I hope that we can work on together, and I will speak to the chairman when this is over, in a bipartisan fashion. This is the message that we should be sending to the youth of this country. That engaging in social media entities like TikTok, this is what you are opening yourself up to. If there is a message, if there is a lesson that should be learned for everything that you have gone through, for all of the risks that you have taken, for all the truth that you have told, I hope that we can relay this message to the youth of the United States of America and let them understand the real threats that this country is facing and that they are opening themselves up to when they're logging on to some bogus app on their phone.
Yeah, I want to say I'm really thankful for America because when literally my home country, Turkey, labeled me as a terrorist and revoked my passport and put my name on the Interpol list, American people in America opened their arm from they want to give me a home, give me a warm welcome. So I cannot thank enough for this country.
And to that excellent point about welcoming those who need to flee, could not agree more. It's one of the greatest things about our country. I would just flag for this committee, there are a number of Uyghurs whose applications for asylum and immigration cases are still pending, and they have fled here and are at risk with status in limbo, so that may be something you all want to look at. We've heard it's as many as several hundred.
Well, Mr. Freedom, thank you for your the questions that you answered, and I'm happy to hear that you're thankful for this great country, because I know I am, and I'm thankful for your truthfulness. So, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes our final member to ask questions, the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Let me thank the chairman for his courtesy and the ranking member for your courtesy. You've always extended it to me. This is a committee that I've served on previously. Let me thank the witnesses as well for their commitment and passion and as well to hear you say what I will repeat, and my colleague just repeated, which is I'm very happy to be here in America and to be able to have as its basic infrastructure democracy and the protection of dissident voices, those that I may disagree with, which is what we fight for. And Democrats have taken that as one of their chosen issues, and we embrace our brothers on the other side of the aisle and sisters for them to also work with us. Democracy is precious. And I think, Mr. Freedom, you have seen that even as a 17-year-old when you came to play basketball, and we enjoyed you a lot. And so I want you to know that your records, your success will not be forgotten. Basketball has now become a worldwide international sport, so you are worldwide and international. The fact that you're using your voice is most crucial. I'd like to think that what we came today to do is to deal with America's reputation as a beacon of hope and freedom to the world, and however we can make that even brighter, we should do that. On the Uyghurs, I am a strong supporter of their plight, and certainly will look at their issues, because obviously they are in an isolated position where the only voices that can aid them are voices that are outside of the country. And we should speak for them because they speak for the idea of democracy. Let me ask Mr. Freedom, and I do want you to believe that you have a home on both sides of the aisle and what that means, and Democrats and Republicans, whether or not there have been any encounters or meetings, please know, because I know you from my previous work on judiciary. We've seen each other, and I know you meet many people, but I can assure you, you have advocates on both sides of the aisle. We are well aware of what is transpiring with the how should I say it, the treatment in Turkey of those who are in Turkey and those who are Turkish outside. So help me know what you think would be the best step forward in a particular country that, as you well know, is called upon to be an ally and I'm sure you've heard that. So that's why I want to give you that opportunity in regions in areas like Syria and other places. There was a moment when people were fraternizing on the streets of Turkey, drinking coffee, and the word secular was a welcome word, and it was just a beautiful place to be. I've been to Turkey on a number of occasions. I think it's called the Blue Mosque. Just enjoyable, and then something happened. Give us what you think and can be most effective, particularly when you speak about what is happening to your relatives who are innocent. And then I'd just like to follow up with, my time is going, Ms. Nia, on this whole issue of the reach that other countries would have to be oppressive, either outside the United States or try to reach to guide our government policies for us to oppress on their behalf, and that we can find the best route not to do that, but to continue to focus on democracy in the United States. The two of you would, Mr. Freedom, if you would, and Ms., is it Nia or Nia? Sorry. Nia, thank you.
So Turkey could be the bridge of Islam and West, but just because of Erdogan's policies, it's impossible. You know, Turkey was once a democratic country, but now it's pretty much the Trojan horse for Putin in NATO. Turkish government and Erdogan was the first government ever that came out and publicly supported Hamas and said, we support Hamas. And first, when I heard about that news, I thought it was an onion news. I really didn't want to believe it, but it happened to be true. Right now, there are thousands of people in jail right now suffering. I believe the last number, if I'm not mistaken, close to 17,000 innocent women and with their kids and babies in jail right now waiting for help, you know? And, you know, this is only happening in Turkey, but outside of Turkey, if you are a journalist that writing anything against the Turkish government, you will be on Interpol list. In one day, Turkish government put 65,000 people's name on Interpol list. And now they are having a very tough time to travel around. So we gotta do whatever we can to put pressure on these governments, because enough with the condemning, because this kind of dictatorships is not gonna understand from condemning. So we have to take concrete actions by sanctioning them. I understand they are a NATO ally, but they don't act like a NATO ally. They literally go around and shaking hands with Putin and shaking hands with people like Khomeini. So enough is enough. We have to pass a bill, put Magnitsky sanctions on individuals around Erdogan, so we can actually show that we are a strong country that cares about human rights. So that breaks my heart to see what's happening over there, because my family's affected by it. I literally haven't seen them 10 years. If they spoke to me, it's an act of terrorism and they'll be in jail the next day. I can't even send them money. I have to send my brother money, and my brother has to send my family money because of act of terrorism, So it is unacceptable, but we gotta do whatever we can to put pressure on these governments with concrete actions.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
Would you just allow her to answer?
I'm going to go ahead and close it down at this point.
All right.
So, gentlelady's time has expired.
Well, can I put this into the record? I was given to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a statement from the German Marshall Fund.
So ordered.
Unanimous consent.
I thank the witnesses for your valuable testimony, for your courage, and for your time today. I think this has been an excellent hearing. And I thank the members for their questions as well. The members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we would ask the witnesses to please respond in writing to these. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7D, the hearing record will be open for 10 days. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.